The chandeliers were too bright. They hummed overhead like angry wasps, casting crystal light across faces I barely recognized. My champagne glass felt cheap in my hands, the kind of plastic trying to pretend it was elegant. The navy silk dress I wore had cost me nothing. I'd sewn it myself from fabric I found years ago in a little shop in Paris. But sitting in that wedding hall, surrounded by people who thought they knew my story, it might as well have been rags. Marjorie raised her glass. My new daughter-in-law. 28 years old with perfectly straight teeth and ambition sharp enough to cut glass. Her blonde hair caught the light as she turned toward me, and I felt my stomach drop. I knew that look. I'd seen it before, in boardrooms and business deals gone wrong. It was the look someone gives right before they try to destroy you. "Let's all raise our glasses," she announced, her voice carrying across the room like honey laced with poison, "to thank Selina Hartwell, my new mother-in-law." The crowd turned. 300 pairs of eyes found me sitting at table 12, not the family table, mind you, but close enough to feel every word like a slap. "Selina did her best," Marjorie continued, pausing just long enough for the words to sink in, "even with so little. She may not have money, but she gave me a husband who finally made something of himself." The laughter started small. Polite chuckles from people who didn't know better. Then it grew. Sharper. Meaner. The kind of laughter that slides under your skin and stays there, burning. "Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story." She smiled as if it was all a big joke, but everyone in that room knew it wasn't. This wasn't about gratitude or family love. This was about power. About making sure everyone saw me exactly how she wanted them to, as a burden. A broke widow. A woman who should thank her lucky stars that someone as successful and beautiful as Marjorie was willing to take my son off my hands. My son Marcus stood beside her, handsome in his black tuxedo, grinning like this was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. 29 years old, and he was laughing at his own mother being called poor in front of half the city's elite. The same son I'd raised alone after his father died. The same son whose college tuition I'd paid without blinking. The same son who had no idea what was really sitting in my bank accounts. I could have spoken up right then. Could have told them all the truth. Could have shattered Marjorie's perfect little speech with 3 simple words, $58 million. But sometimes silence cuts deeper than the sharpest blade. Sometimes letting people show you exactly who they are is more powerful than proving who you really are. So I smiled, lifted my plastic champagne glass, and sat back in the shadows while my entire life was rewritten in front of me. The applause died down. Conversations resumed. The wedding moved on like nothing had happened. But something had changed in that room. Something had shifted between me and the woman who now carried my family name. Marjorie had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd assumed I was weak. Assumed I was broken. Assumed I would take her public humiliation and swallow it like bitter medicine. She thought she knew my story. Thought she could erase me with a few well-placed words and some fake sympathy. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been building empires while she was still in diapers. What she didn't know was that the broke widow sitting at table 12 owned more assets than everyone in that room combined. And what she definitely didn't know was that I'd been watching her. Carefully. Quietly. For months. The paper trail she'd been leaving behind wasn't as clean as she thought it was. Would you have stayed quiet in that moment, or would you have exposed her right there in front of everyone? Tell me in the comments before we go deeper into what really happened that night, and how a woman everyone thought was powerless was about to teach them all a lesson they'd never forget. The smell of fresh coffee couldn't mask the scent of betrayal that morning. I sat in my kitchen 3 days after the wedding, staring at a stack of papers spread across my white counters like fallen leaves. My hands shook as I held Roland's favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle that he'd refused to throw away for 15 years. 15 years. That's how long we'd built our empire together, one contract at a time, one warehouse at a time, one impossible deal at a time. Roland Hartwell had the charm to win over clients, but I had the brain that made the numbers work. While he was out shaking hands and signing deals, I was in the back office, buried in spreadsheets and compliance reports, making sure every dollar was accounted for. People saw Roland as the face of Hartwell Logistics. The newspapers wrote about his business genius, his risk-taking, his vision. What they didn't see was me, working until 2 a.m, catching the accounting errors that could have cost us millions, finding the tax loopholes that saved us from bankruptcy in the early days. I wasn't just Roland's wife. I was his secret weapon. The invisible partner who turned his dreams into reality. But Roland never made me feel invisible. When we were alone, he'd tell me the truth. "Selena, honey, I'm just the pretty face. You're the brains behind everything we've built." He'd kiss my forehead and say, "Without you, I'd still be driving a delivery truck." We had a system. A perfect partnership. Roland handled the clients and the public relations. I handled everything else: the contracts, the finances, the legal compliance, the strategic planning. Together, we turned a small delivery company into a logistics empire worth over $60 million. Then came that Tuesday morning in March. The phone call that changed everything. Roland collapsed at the office. Massive heart attack. Gone before the ambulance even arrived. I'd never felt grief like that before. It wasn't just sadness. It was like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out half my soul. The man who'd been my partner in everything, my best friend, my anchor, was just gone. 58 years old and gone, leaving me to figure out how to breathe without him. The funeral was a blur of flowers and condolences and business associates telling me how sorry they were. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone had advice. Everyone knew better than I did what Roland would have wanted. Marcus brought Marjorie to meet me that week. His new girlfriend, he said. A marketing consultant who understood business. Someone who could help me navigate the complicated financial situation I'd inherited. I should have been suspicious when a 28-year-old woman I'd never met started offering to help manage a $60 million company. But I was drowning in grief, and she threw me what looked like a lifeline. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said in that sweet voice I now know was pure poison, "I know how overwhelming this must be. You shouldn't have to worry about paperwork at a time like this. Let me help you organize everything." She had such kind eyes. Such a gentle way of speaking. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor, taking care of the boring business details so I could focus on healing. I trusted her. God help me, I actually trusted her. The documents started small. Simple things. Bank signature cards that needed updating. Insurance forms that required new beneficiaries. Legal papers that she said were just routine maintenance after Roland's death. "Just sign here, Mrs. Hartwell. This will make everything so much easier for you." I signed. In my fog of grief and exhaustion, I signed whatever she put in front of me. She was family now, wasn't she? Marcus loved her. She was going to be my daughter-in-law. She wanted to help. What I didn't know was that each signature was like handing her a key to everything Roland and I had built together. Every document she brought me wasn't about helping. It was about taking. Have you ever lost someone so important that you couldn't think straight for months? Share your story in the comments. I know I'm not alone in making mistakes while grieving. It took 6 months for the fog to clear. 6 months before I could look at numbers again without crying. 6 months before I could walk into Roland's office without falling apart. And when I finally started paying attention again, I realized something was wrong. Bank statements that didn't add up. Properties that seemed to be missing from our portfolio. Contracts that had been transferred without my knowledge. That's when I found the first document that made my blood run cold. A quitclaim deed for our biggest warehouse in Baltimore. Signed by me, apparently, just 2 months after Roland's funeral. Transferring ownership to something called Meridian Holdings LLC. The problem was, I'd never heard of Meridian Holdings. And I definitely hadn't signed any quitclaim deed. And it was in that fog of grief that the first document slid under my nose. But what she didn't know was that I kept copies of everything, and some signatures leave traces that are impossible to hide. The quitclaim deed lay on my kitchen table like a smoking gun. Every detail about it was wrong. The signature looked like mine. She'd done a decent job of copying my handwriting, but the pen ink was different. The paper was newer than it should have been. And the notary listed at the bottom? A man named David Chun who worked at a UPS store in downtown Baltimore. I'd never met David Chun in my life. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in months. Grief has a way of making you feel powerless, but finding proof that someone is stealing from you? That's a different kind of fuel entirely. That's pure, focused anger. I drove to that UPS store the next morning. It was squeezed between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop, the kind of place that stays busy with people shipping packages and making copies. David Chun was exactly what I expected, a tired-looking man in his 40s who notarized documents all day without paying much attention to who was signing them. "I need to ask you about a document you notarized," I told him, sliding the quitclaim deed across the counter. He barely glanced at it. "Lady, I notarize like 50 documents a day. I can't remember every." "This one transferred a $2 million warehouse," I interrupted. "You might remember that." That got his attention. He picked up the paper and studied it more carefully. His face changed as he read through the details. "Yeah, I remember this one," he said slowly. "But the woman who came in wasn't you." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "The woman who signed this was younger. Blonde hair, real polite. She had ID that said Selena Hartwell, but now that I'm looking at you." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "She used fake ID?" "Look, I'm not supposed to question people's identification, you know? She had a driver's license, seemed legitimate. How was I supposed to know?" I took a photo of David Chun with my phone, right there in his store. "I'm going to need you to write down everything you remember about that day. And I mean everything. What she looked like, what she was wearing, what time she came in, who else was with her." He started to protest, but I'd spent 15 years in business negotiations. I knew how to make people understand when something wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, I walked out of that UPS store with a handwritten statement from David Chun describing the blonde woman who'd impersonated me to steal my warehouse. But that was just the beginning. I went home and started digging through every document Marjorie had ever brought me. Bank statements, property transfers, insurance changes, contract modifications. I spread them across my dining room table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, looking for patterns. The timestamps were all wrong. Documents that were supposedly signed on days when I was at doctor's appointments or visiting friends. Signature dates that didn't match the paper dates. Email confirmations sent to addresses I'd never seen before. Then I found the computer files. Roland's old laptop was still in his office, password protected with our wedding anniversary. I'd been avoiding it for months. Too painful to look at his emails, his photos, his work files. But now I needed to see what was there. Hidden in a folder buried deep in his documents, I found drafts of contracts I'd never seen before. Agreements that transferred control of various assets to holding companies I'd never heard of. But here's the thing that made my blood boil. The metadata showed these files had been edited after Roland died. Someone had been using his computer to create fake documents, then signing my name to them. I called the phone company that night and requested detailed records for both my phone and Roland's old business line. What I found made me sick. Dozens of calls to legal offices, accounting firms, and asset management companies. All made from Roland's phone after he was already dead. Someone had been impersonating my dead husband to arrange the theft of our life's work. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes. Marjorie hadn't just been helping me with paperwork during my grief. She'd been systematically stealing everything Roland and I had built together. Using forged documents, fake IDs, and my dead husband's business contacts to transfer millions of dollars in assets to companies she controlled. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd assumed I was just a grieving widow who'd never pay attention to the details. She didn't know that I'd been the real brains behind Hartwell Logistics for 15 years. She didn't know that I could spot financial irregularities from a mile away. Most importantly, she didn't know that I kept backup copies of everything. What would you do if you discovered someone had been using your grief to steal everything you'd worked your whole life to build? Let me know in the comments, because what I did next changed everything. Every trail led back to one conclusion. Marjorie hadn't just married my son for love. She'd been planning this theft from the moment she met him, and the notary listed on the deed? A man I had never even met. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing down every detail I could remember about the past 8 months. Every conversation with Marjorie. Every document she'd brought me to sign. Every helpful suggestion she'd made about managing my finances. It was all there, clear as day once I stopped seeing her as my grieving son's loving girlfriend and started seeing her as what she really was. A predator who'd targeted my family the moment she heard the name Hartwell Logistics. By sunrise, I'd filled 12 pages with notes. But notes weren't enough. I needed help from someone who understood how to trace financial crimes. Someone who could turn my suspicions into evidence that would hold up in court. I remembered Dr. Yvonne Mercer from a women's financial literacy seminar I'd attended 3 years earlier. She was a retired professor of forensic accounting who'd spent her career helping people track down stolen assets and financial fraud. Sharp as a razor and calm as still water. I called her at 8 in the morning. Dr. Mercer, this is Selina Hartwell. We met at the Women's Finance Seminar in 2022. I need help with what I believe is a systematic theft of my assets. There was a pause. Then, in a voice that could have steadied a storm, she said, Mrs. Hartwell, are you somewhere you can talk freely? I'm in my kitchen, alone. Good. Tell me everything, and don't leave out any details. In financial fraud cases, it's the small details that usually prove guilt. For the next hour, I told her everything. The wedding humiliation. The documents signed during my grief. The fake notary. The forged signatures. The computer files that had been edited after Roland's death. The phone calls made from a dead man's business line. Dr. Mercer listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on specific dates or amounts. When I finished, there was a long silence. Mrs. Hartwell, what you're describing isn't just theft. It's identity fraud, forgery, and possibly racketeering if she's been using shell companies to hide the stolen assets. But here's what you need to understand: proving it will require patience and precision. People who commit this level of financial fraud are usually careful about covering their tracks. What do I need to do? First, don't confront her or let her know you're suspicious. If she realizes you're investigating, she'll destroy evidence or transfer the remaining assets somewhere we can't find them. Second, we need to document everything with timestamps, metadata analysis, and forensic accounting. And third, you're going to need a lawyer who specializes in asset recovery. Dr. Mercer gave me the name of attorney Leonard Duval, a man who'd spent 20 years helping victims of financial fraud recover their stolen assets. He's expensive, she warned me, But he's worth every penny. And he doesn't like to lose. I called Leonard's office that afternoon. His secretary told me he was booked solid for the next month, but when I mentioned Dr. Mercer's name and explained briefly what had happened, she put me on hold for 3 minutes and came back with a different answer. Mr. Duval can see you tomorrow morning at 9. Please bring every document you mentioned to Dr. Mercer. Leonard Duval's office was nothing like I expected. No fancy furniture or expensive art. Just filing cabinets, computer equipment, and walls covered with charts and timelines that looked like they belonged in a detective show. The man himself was in his 50s, wearing a rumpled shirt and tie, with the kind of intense focus that made you feel like he could see right through you. Mrs. Hartwell, Dr. Mercer briefed me on your situation. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do isn't just about getting your money back. We're going to destroy the person who stole from you, and we're going to do it so thoroughly that she'll never be able to commit this kind of fraud against anyone else. He spread my documents across a large table and studied them with a magnifying glass, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. After 20 minutes, he looked up. Your daughter-in-law made several critical mistakes. She got greedy and moved too fast. She also underestimated you, which is always a fatal error in cases like this. What kind of mistakes? The metadata on these digital files shows exactly when and where they were edited. The phone records you pulled prove someone was using your husband's business line after his death. The notary you tracked down can identify her in a lineup. And most importantly, she's been using the same shell companies for multiple transactions, which makes them easier to trace. Leonard leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hartwell, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can tell you with complete confidence, we're going to get every penny back plus damages. But I need you to promise me something. What? You have to let me handle this my way. That means no confronting her, no angry phone calls, no dramatic scenes at family dinners. We're going to be quiet, methodical, and devastating. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late for her to do anything about it. I thought about the humiliation at the wedding. About being called broke in front of 300 people. About watching my son laugh while his wife rewrote the story of my life. She called me powerless, I told Leonard. She made sure everyone in that room saw me as a burden. Leonard smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. Mrs. Hartwell, by the time we're finished with her, she's going to learn exactly what powerless really means. Have you ever had someone underestimate you so badly that it actually worked in your favor? Let me know in the comments, because what Leonard said next made me realize that sometimes the best revenge is served with perfect documentation. Together, we formed a triangle of quiet power. Dr. Mercer tracing the financial breadcrumbs, Leonard setting up legal traps that couldn't be escaped, and me, the widow they thought was weak, quietly stacking evidence like firewood waiting for a match. The investigation became my full-time job. Every morning, I'd sit at my kitchen table with my laptop, coffee, and a stack of documents that grew larger by the day. Dr. Mercer had taught me how to read metadata, the hidden information in digital files that shows exactly when and where documents were created or modified. What we found was devastating. The quitclaim deed for the Baltimore warehouse had been drafted at 3:12 a.m. on a Tuesday night, 2 weeks before it was supposedly signed. The computer that created it was registered to someone named Margaret Johnson, but a quick search revealed that Margaret Johnson was Marjorie's maiden name. She'd been planning this theft for months before Roland died. Dr. Mercer walked me through each piece of evidence like a detective explaining a murder case. Look at this, Selena. This email was sent from your husband's business account 3 weeks after his funeral, confirming a meeting with a lawyer in Delaware. The IP address traces back to your daughter-in-law's apartment. She was using Roland's email to set up meetings? Not just meetings. Look at this chain. Yvonne pulled up a series of emails between Roland's account and something called Meridian Holdings LLC. The correspondence discussed transferring ownership of 3 separate properties, all dated after Roland's death. She was having email conversations with herself? Exactly. Creating a paper trail that would make it look like your husband had authorized these transfers before he died. But she got sloppy with the timestamps. Leonard's contribution was even more damaging. He'd hired a forensic computer analyst who'd recovered deleted files from Roland's old laptop. What they found made my stomach turn. Dozens of practice signatures where Marjorie had been learning to forge my handwriting. Screenshots of my driver's license and social security card, probably taken when she'd offered to help me with insurance paperwork. Draft after draft of legal documents transferring assets to shell companies she controlled. But the smoking gun was a folder labeled Project Hartwell. Inside that folder was a complete plan for dismantling everything Roland and I had built. Spreadsheets listing every asset we owned, with notes about which ones would be easiest to transfer. Contact information for lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors who specialized in complex estate planning. Even a timeline showing when each theft would take place. She'd been studying us like a hunter studies prey. The phone records told another story entirely. In the 6 months after Roland's death, Marjorie had made over 200 calls to financial institutions, legal offices, and asset management companies. Always during business hours. Always from Roland's old business line. Always pretending to be either me or my deceased husband. This is systematic financial identity theft, Leonard explained during one of our weekly meetings. She didn't just steal your money, she stole your entire financial identity and used it to authorize transactions worth millions of dollars. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Leonard had subpoenaed security camera footage from the bank where several of the major transactions had taken place. The footage showed Marjorie walking into the bank, signing documents, and walking out with cashier's checks made out to her shell companies. She'd been bold enough to show her face while committing felony fraud. How did she think she'd get away with this? I asked Leonard. She probably figured you'd never notice. A lot of widows in your situation do exactly what she expected. They delegate financial decisions to younger family members and never ask questions. She counted on your grief making you passive. But I'm not passive. No, Mrs. Hartwell, you're definitely not. And that's going to be her downfall. We spent weeks building our case like architects designing a skyscraper. Every piece of evidence had to be documented, verified, and connected to the larger pattern of theft. Dr. Mercer created financial charts showing exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. Leonard prepared legal filings that would freeze all of Marjorie's shell companies and personal assets. The hardest part was keeping quiet. Marjorie had no idea we were investigating her. She continued to visit occasionally, bringing Marcus for Sunday dinner, acting like the loving daughter-in-law who'd helped me through my difficult time. Watching her sit at my kitchen table, eating my food, lying to my face, it took every ounce of self-control I had not to confront her right there. But Leonard had made me promise to wait until we were ready to spring our trap. One conversation could ruin everything, he'd warned me. If she knows we're onto her, she could transfer the remaining assets offshore or claim someone else was using her identity. We get one shot at this, and it has to be perfect. The break we'd been waiting for came on a Thursday morning in October. Dr. Mercer called me, barely containing her excitement. Selena, we found the smoking gun. She made a mistake with the overseas accounts. What kind of mistake? She tried to transfer $2 million to a bank in the Cayman Islands, but she forgot to use a VPN to hide her IP address. The transaction logs show it was initiated from her laptop, in her apartment, at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday. Leonard confirmed what this meant during our meeting that afternoon. We now have proof that she's been moving stolen assets to offshore accounts. That turns this from a civil case into a federal crime. The FBI takes international money laundering very seriously. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. All those months of careful investigation were about to pay off. What happens next? Leonard smiled, that same predatory smile I'd seen before. Next, we file for emergency asset freezes on all her accounts, domestic and international. Then we notify the FBI about the international transfers. And then we wait for her to realize that her entire world is about to collapse. Have you ever spent months planning something that would completely change someone's life? Comment below, because what I didn't know was that our investigation was about to uncover something even worse than simple theft, and Leonard's quiet confidence was about to be put to the ultimate test. Every breadcrumb led us closer to the truth, and each discovery hit me like a physical blow, but it also fueled my determination to see justice done. And then we found an email with her name on it, discussing something called Phase 2, that made my blood run cold. The phone rang at exactly 7:23 a.m. on a Monday morning in November. I was making coffee, humming quietly to myself for the first time in months, when Marjorie's number flashed across my screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice sleepy and confused. "Hello, Selena." Her voice was different, tighter. The sugar-sweet tone was still there, but underneath it was something sharper. Something that sounded like panic. "I hope I didn't wake you, but we have a small problem with some of the paperwork." I set my coffee mug down carefully. Leonard had filed the emergency asset freeze orders on Friday afternoon. It had taken exactly 3 business days for Marjorie to realize her accounts were locked. "What kind of problem, dear?" "Well, it's probably just a clerical error, but it seems like there's been some kind of hold placed on a few business accounts. Nothing major, I'm sure, but the bank is asking for additional documentation." I could hear her breathing change. Quick, shallow breaths, like someone trying not to hyperventilate. She was scared. "I don't understand, Marjorie. What business accounts? I thought Roland's estate was all settled months ago." "It is. It's completely settled. This is just administrative confusion. But they're asking about some of the warehouse transfers we did after the funeral. Do you remember signing those quitclaim deeds?" There it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. She was trying to get me to confirm that I'd willingly signed documents that I'd never actually seen. "I signed so many papers during that time," I said, letting my voice shake just a little. I was so grief-stricken, I barely remember what I was signing. "You were such a help, taking care of all that complicated business stuff." "Right, exactly. You were grieving. So if anyone asks, you'll remember that you signed those documents willingly, won't you? Because you did. You absolutely did sign them." She was coaching me, trying to get me to lie to federal investigators without actually saying the words out loud. "Of course, dear. But who would be asking?" "Oh, probably no one. Just, you know how banks are. They love their paperwork." She forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Listen, I should probably come over later this week. Maybe we can go through some of the old files together, refresh your memory about what we signed when." "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to see you." After I hung up, I immediately called Leonard. He answered on the first ring. "She called, didn't she? How did you know?" "Because as of this morning, she can't access any of the accounts she's been using to hide your money. She's probably been trying to transfer funds since Friday and hitting nothing but frozen accounts and blocked transactions." I felt a cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. She tried to coach me into lying about signing documents I never signed. Perfect. That's witness tampering, which is a separate federal crime. Did you record the conversation? No, I didn't think. Don't worry about it. From now on, every interaction with her gets recorded. I'm sending over a device that looks like a pen but captures everything. When she comes to visit this week, we'll get her admitting to fraud on tape. The satisfaction I felt was sharper than anything I'd experienced since Roland died. For months, Marjorie had been playing chess while I didn't even know there was a game. Now the board had flipped, and she was the one scrambling to understand the rules. But Leonard's next words brought me back to reality. Selena, I need you to understand something. She's going to get desperate now. Desperate people do unpredictable things. Don't meet with her alone, and don't let her into your house without witnesses present. You think she's dangerous? I think she's stolen millions of dollars and is about to go to federal prison. That makes anyone dangerous. The next 3 days passed slowly. I could feel Marjorie circling like a shark that smells blood in the water. She called twice more, each time sounding more frantic, asking about documents and meetings and whether I'd heard from any lawyers or government officials. Each call was the same pattern. She'd start sweet, asking about my health and whether I needed anything. Then she'd gradually steer the conversation toward the business assets, trying to get me to confirm that I'd willingly transferred everything to her shell companies. You remember signing over the Baltimore warehouse, don't you, Selena? You said it was too much responsibility for you to handle alone. You remember agreeing that it made sense to consolidate the shipping contracts under one management company, right? You remember telling me you trusted my judgment about the financial restructuring, don't you? Each time, I played the confused widow. I remember you helping me with so much paperwork, dear. I don't know what I would have done without you. It was almost funny, watching her try to rewrite history in real time. She was so confident that I was too stupid or too grief-stricken to remember what had really happened. On Thursday afternoon, she showed up at my door unannounced. I could see her through the window, pacing on my front porch, checking her phone, looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. When I opened the door, she looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was messy, her makeup was smeared, and her hands were shaking. Selena, we need to talk. Right now. Of course, dear. Come in. She followed me into the kitchen, where I'd already set up Leonard's recording device next to the sugar bowl. To anyone else, it looked like a regular pen lying on the counter. The bank is asking more questions, she said without preamble. They want to verify some of the documents we signed after Roland's death. They're being very thorough. That sounds reasonable. Banks should be thorough. No, it's not reasonable. She snapped, then caught herself and tried to soften her tone. I mean, it's unnecessary. Everything we did was legal and proper. But sometimes banks get confused about complex estate planning. I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. What kind of questions are they asking? They want to know if you were mentally competent when you signed the transfer documents. They're asking if you had legal representation. They want to see medical records proving you were of sound mind. There it was. She was worried that someone was questioning whether a grieving widow had been competent to sign away $60 million in assets. Well, I was competent. Sad, but competent. Exactly. And you'll tell them that, won't you? You'll tell them that you made all these decisions freely, with full knowledge of what you were signing. I looked at her directly for the first time since she'd arrived. Really looked at her. This woman who'd sat at my kitchen table, eaten my food, hugged my son, and systematically stolen everything I'd worked my entire life to build. Marjorie, I said quietly, are you asking me to lie? Her face went completely white. No, of course not. I'm asking you to tell the truth. The truth is that you signed those documents willingly. The truth is that I don't remember signing half the documents you're talking about. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much danger she was in. Selina, she said finally, I think your grief might be affecting your memory. Maybe you should see a doctor about that. I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Maybe I should. She left 10 minutes later, promising to call soon to check on me. But I could see in her eyes that she knew something had changed. The broken widow she'd been manipulating was gone, replaced by someone who was asking uncomfortable questions. What would you do if someone tried to gaslight you into forgetting your own reality? Leave a comment, because what happened next proved that sometimes the prey becomes the predator. But that was only the beginning. Because what Marjorie didn't know was that while she'd been panicking about frozen accounts, Leonard had been preparing something that would make her money problems look like a paperwork error, and the settlement papers were about to arrive on my doorstep. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper with gold-embossed lettering. Marcus and Marjorie Hartwell cordially invite you to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. The date was set for 3 weeks away, at the same country club where they'd had their wedding. The same place where she'd humiliated me in front of 300 people. I stared at that invitation for a long time, remembering her speech about how I had nothing but gave her a husband who finally made something of himself. The laughter that had followed. The way she'd looked at me like I was a burden that had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Leonard called that afternoon with an update. The FBI has opened an official investigation into the international transfers. They're treating this as organized financial fraud, possibly with ties to money laundering operations overseas. What does that mean for Marjorie? It means she's looking at serious federal prison time. 25 years minimum if they can prove she was working with international criminal organizations to hide stolen assets. I felt a cold satisfaction at those words, but Leonard wasn't finished. There's something else. They found connections between her shell companies and at least 3 other cases of estate fraud across the country. Selina, your daughter-in-law isn't just an opportunistic thief. She's part of a network that targets wealthy widows and widowers. That hit me like a physical blow. You mean she's done this before? Multiple times. The FBI thinks she may have stolen upwards of $200 million from grieving families over the past 5 years. You weren't her first victim, and you wouldn't have been her last. I thought about all the other people like me, devastated by loss, trusting someone who seemed kind and helpful, only to discover they'd been systematically robbed while they were too grief-stricken to pay attention. Leonard, I want to go to that anniversary party. Absolutely not. That's too dangerous. She knows something's wrong now, and cornering her at a public event. She humiliated me at their wedding. Called me broke in front of everyone I know. I want to be there when her world falls apart. There was a long pause. What exactly are you planning? Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would compromise the legal case. I just want to be in that room when justice finally shows up at her party. Leonard was quiet for almost a minute. Then, if you're determined to do this, we'll do it right. I'll be there as your guest. Dr. Mercer will be there too. And we'll have federal agents positioned throughout the venue, just in case she tries to run. Can you arrange that? Selina, she's now a federal fugitive who's been stealing money from grieving families for half a decade. The FBI is very interested in making sure she doesn't disappear before her trial. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Leonard coached me on what to say and what not to say if Marjorie tried to confront me at the party. Dr. Mercer prepared a comprehensive financial audit showing exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. The FBI worked on coordinating with international law enforcement to freeze Marjorie's offshore accounts. But the most important preparation was psychological. I had to be ready to face the woman who'd stolen my life's work while pretending to love my family. The night of the party, I chose my outfit carefully. An emerald silk dress that Roland had bought me for our 20th wedding anniversary. Emerald earrings that had belonged to his grandmother. And a quiet confidence that came from knowing the truth was finally going to see daylight. Leonard picked me up at 7. Dr. Mercer was already in the back seat, wearing a simple black dress and carrying a briefcase that contained enough evidence to send Marjorie to prison for the rest of her life. "Remember," Leonard said as we drove to the country club, "you don't need to do anything dramatic. We're not there for revenge. We're there to watch justice happen." "What about Marcus? My son still doesn't know what his wife has done." "He's going to find out tonight, along with everyone else." The country club looked exactly the same as it had a year earlier. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters in black ties carrying champagne on silver trays. But this time, I wasn't sitting at table 12 in the shadows. Leonard had made sure we were seated at table 3, close enough to the head table to see every expression on Marjorie's face. She looked beautiful, of course. A silver dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, her hair perfectly styled, her smile bright enough to power the chandelier. She worked the room like a politician, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, playing the role of happy wife celebrating her first year of marriage. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a moment. Then she recovered, walking over to our table with her arms extended. "Selena, I'm so glad you could make it. And you brought guests." I stood up and hugged her, feeling like I was embracing a snake. "Marjorie, you remember Dr. Mercer from the Women's Finance Seminar. And this is my attorney, Leonard Duval." Her face went completely white when I said the word attorney. She recovered quickly, but not before I saw the flash of pure panic in her eyes. "Your attorney? Is everything all right?" "Oh yes, everything's wonderful now. Leonard has been helping me understand some complicated financial documents. You know how confusing business paperwork can be." She excused herself quickly, claiming she needed to check on the catering. But I could see her across the room, whispering urgently into her phone, probably trying to figure out if there was still time to run. At 9 o'clock, the MC called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation this evening. Mrs. Selena Hartwell, mother of the groom, would like to say a few words about the happy couple." This wasn't part of the original program. Leonard had arranged it through his contacts at the venue. Marjorie looked confused and alarmed as I walked to the microphone, but she couldn't object without causing a scene. I stood at that podium, looking out at 300 faces, including many of the same people who'd heard her call me broke a year earlier. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Marcus and Marjorie's first wedding anniversary. A year ago, in this very room, my daughter-in-law gave a speech about how I had nothing but gave her a husband who finally made something of himself." I could hear the murmur of recognition from the crowd. They remembered. Tonight, I'd like to share some information that puts that speech in a very different context. I nodded to Leonard. He walked to the microphone and opened his briefcase. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my life, and I didn't have to say a single word, I just had to stand there and let the truth speak for itself. But Marjorie's reaction to hearing her crimes read aloud in front of everyone she knew, that was something I'll never forget. And what the FBI agents did next shocked even me. Leonard's voice was calm and professional as he addressed the silent ballroom. 300 people in evening wear, holding crystal glasses of champagne, listening to a forensic accountant explain how they'd all been watching a criminal operate for the past year. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Leonard Duval, and I'm Mrs. Hartwell's attorney. Over the past 6 months, we've conducted a comprehensive investigation into fraudulent activities committed against Mrs. Hartwell's estate following her husband's death." You could have heard a pin drop. Every eye in the room was fixed on Leonard, except for Marjorie's. She was scanning the exits, her face the color of ash. Our investigation, conducted in cooperation with federal law enforcement, has revealed that Mrs. Marjorie Hartwell has systematically stolen approximately $58 million in assets from Mrs. Selina Hartwell through the use of forged documents, identity theft, and fraudulent financial transactions. The gasps started then. A ripple of shock that moved through the crowd like a wave. I could see people turning to look at Marjorie, who was now gripping the edge of the head table so hard her knuckles were white. Leonard continued reading from his prepared statement. The evidence includes forged signatures, falsified notarizations, fabricated legal documents, and the creation of shell companies designed to hide stolen assets. Mrs. Marjorie Hartwell has also been implicated in similar crimes committed against at least 6 other victims across the United States. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face a mask of confusion and horror. "What the hell are you talking about? This is our anniversary party." Leonard looked at him with something like sympathy. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm sorry you're learning about this in such a public forum. But your wife has been using your relationship with Mrs. Hartwell to commit federal crimes." That's when Marjorie made her move. She grabbed her purse from the table and headed for the nearest exit, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor. She made it about 20 feet before 2 men in dark suits stepped into her path. "Mrs. Marjorie Hartwell, FBI. You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and international money laundering." The entire ballroom erupted. People were standing, talking loudly, pulling out their phones to record the scene. Marjorie was screaming something about this being a mistake, about having lawyers, about how she was being set up. I watched it all from the podium, feeling strangely calm. This woman had stolen my life's work while I was grieving my husband. She'd called me broke in front of these same people while hiding my own money in offshore accounts. She'd planned to strip me of everything Roland and I had built together. Now she was being handcuffed in front of everyone she'd tried to impress. The FBI agents weren't gentle. They read her rights in loud, clear voices that carried across the silent ballroom. Everyone could hear every word about her right to remain silent, her right to an attorney, and how anything she said could be used against her in court. Marcus was standing in the middle of it all, looking like someone had just told him his entire life was a lie. Which, in many ways, it was. One of the agents approached me after they'd taken Marjorie away. "Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for your cooperation with this investigation. We'll need you to testify before a grand jury next month, but tonight you can go home knowing that justice has been served." Leonard gathered his papers and walked back to our table. "Well, that went better than I expected." "Better how?" "She didn't try to run until it was too late. And having 300 witnesses see her get arrested will make it very difficult for her to claim she's innocent." Dr. Mercer was quietly satisfied. The financial evidence was overwhelming. She would have been convicted even without tonight's dramatic arrest, but this certainly makes the case easier. As we prepared to leave, Marcus approached our table. My son looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His perfect anniversary celebration had turned into a federal crime scene, and his wife was on her way to jail. "Mom, is this real? Did she really steal from you?" For the first time all evening, I felt genuinely sad. Sad for my son, who'd fallen in love with a predator. Sad for the naive young man who'd thought he'd found the perfect wife. "Yes, Marcus. She stole everything your father and I built together. She did it while I was grieving, when I trusted her to help me." "But why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me marry her if you knew?" "I didn't know when you married her. I only found out months later, when I started paying attention to what she'd been doing with the paperwork I'd signed." Marcus sat down heavily in one of the empty chairs. "I feel so stupid. I thought she loved me." She might have loved you, son. But she loved our money more. The drive home was quiet. Leonard and Dr. Mercer talked softly about next steps, the grand jury testimony, the asset recovery process, the timeline for getting my stolen property back. But I was barely listening. I was thinking about the look on Marjorie's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. The shock, the fear, the desperate realization that all her careful planning had collapsed in the space of 10 minutes. She'd spent a year rewriting my story, making me the broke widow who should be grateful for her charity. Tonight, the real story had finally been told. And everyone who'd laughed at her wedding speech had heard every word. Have you ever watched someone face the consequences of their actions in real time? Share your thoughts in the comments, because what I learned about true power that night changed how I see justice forever. The media coverage started the next morning, and what they uncovered about Marjorie's past made my case look small compared to the massive criminal enterprise she'd been running, but there was still one more surprise waiting for me in the mail. The newspapers called it the anniversary arrest. By Tuesday morning, every major news outlet in the state was running the story of the society wedding that turned into a federal crime scene. The photos were everywhere. Marjorie in handcuffs, FBI agents at a black tie party, shocked guests in evening wear watching a criminal get arrested. But the media attention brought something else: other victims. My phone started ringing that Tuesday afternoon. The first call was from a woman named Patricia Chan in California. "Mrs. Hartwell, I saw your story on the news. I think the same woman who stole from you stole from me." "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, my husband died in a car accident. A few months later, I met a woman named Margaret Johnson at a grief support group. She offered to help me organize his financial affairs. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd stolen $3 million from his insurance settlement. My blood went cold. Margaret Johnson, Marjorie's maiden name. Did you report it to the police? I tried, but she'd disappeared. Changed her name, moved to a different state. The local police said there wasn't much they could do across state lines. Leonard's office received similar calls throughout the week. A widower in Texas whose financial advisor had stolen his retirement savings. A widow in Florida whose estate planner had transferred her husband's life insurance money to offshore accounts. A grieving father in Oregon whose probate consultant had made off with the proceeds from his wife's business. All the descriptions matched Marjorie. Different names, different stories, but the same methods. She'd been targeting grieving families across the country for years. "Selena," Leonard explained during our Thursday meeting, "the FBI now believes she's stolen over $200 million from at least 23 families. This isn't just a case about your money anymore. This is about a criminal organization that preys on people in their most vulnerable moments." The scope of it was staggering. While I'd been grieving Roland, Marjorie had been operating a nationwide fraud scheme that turned tragedy into profit. What happens to the other victims? The FBI is working to recover assets for everyone. But your case is the strongest because you caught her before she could move all the money offshore. Your evidence is what's going to bring down the entire operation. Marcus came to see me that Friday afternoon. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and thin, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating properly since the arrest. His perfect life had crumbled in one evening, and he was struggling to understand how he'd been so completely deceived. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." "Of course." "When you found out what she was doing, why didn't you warn me? Why did you let me stay married to a criminal?" I'd been dreading this conversation all week. How do you tell your adult son that his wife was a predator without making him feel like a fool? "Marcus, I didn't have proof until recently. And even if I had, would you have believed me? You were in love with her. If I'd told you she was stealing from me, what would you have thought?" He was quiet for a long moment. I would have thought you were jealous. I would have thought you couldn't accept that I'd found someone who made me happy. Exactly. She was counting on that. She knew that if I accused her without overwhelming proof, it would just drive a wedge between us. So you protected our relationship by letting her keep stealing from you? I protected our relationship by building a case that would prove the truth beyond any doubt. Marcus started crying then. Not the quiet tears of sadness, but the angry, frustrated sobs of someone who'd been completely betrayed. I loved her, Mom. I really loved her. I thought she was the best thing that ever happened to me. I held my son while he cried, and for the first time since Roland's death, I felt like I was getting my family back. The settlement offers started arriving the following week. Marjorie's lawyers, she'd hired 3 of them, were trying to negotiate a plea deal that would keep her out of federal prison. They were offering to return all the stolen assets in exchange for reduced charges. Leonard laughed when he showed me the first offer. They want her to plead guilty to a single count of wire fraud with a recommendation for probation and community service. That's ridiculous. It gets better. They're claiming she was mentally ill, that she was suffering from some kind of psychological break that made her think she was helping people by consolidating their assets. What's our response? We're not accepting any plea deals. She's going to trial, and she's going to federal prison. But here's the interesting part. She's also going to pay restitution to every single person she stole from, not just you. The final settlement documents arrived on a Tuesday morning in December. Marjorie had agreed to forfeit all assets obtained through fraudulent means. The government had seized her house, her cars, her jewelry, and frozen bank accounts across 4 countries. The total recovery was almost $300 million. But what satisfied me most wasn't the money, it was the admission of guilt. In order to avoid a trial that could have sent her to prison for life, Marjorie had signed a detailed confession acknowledging every crime she'd committed against me and the other victims. She admitted to forging my signature. She admitted to creating false documents. She admitted to impersonating me at banks and financial institutions. She admitted to stealing $58 million while I was grieving my husband. Most importantly, she admitted that her wedding speech about me having nothing was part of a deliberate strategy to make me seem like a burden who should be grateful for her help. The confession was 17 pages long, and every word of it validated what I'd known all along. She'd seen my grief as an opportunity, and my trust as a weakness to exploit. What's going to happen to her now? I asked Leonard. Federal prison. 15 years minimum, probably closer to 25. And when she gets out, she'll be banned from working in any financial industry for the rest of her life. I felt a satisfaction that went deeper than revenge. This was justice, not just for me, but for every person she'd victimized while they were in their darkest moments. Have you ever seen someone face real consequences for their actions? Let me know in the comments, because what I learned about the difference between revenge and justice changed everything I thought I knew about forgiveness. The day before Christmas, I received an envelope with no return address, and what I found inside made me realize that some victories are worth more than money. They're about reclaiming your dignity and your story. The envelope was cream-colored and expensive, the kind Marjorie used to send her party invitations. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking somehow she'd found a way to contact me from federal prison. But when I opened it, I found something completely different. Inside was a handwritten letter from Patricia Chan, the California woman who'd called me after seeing the news coverage. But it wasn't just her letter. It was letters from all 23 victims that the FBI had identified. They'd coordinated to send me a single package, each person writing a few paragraphs about what my case had meant to them. Patricia wrote, "Because you had the courage to investigate and fight back, my husband's stolen money is being returned to our children. You gave us justice when we thought there was none." A widower from Texas, I thought I was stupid for trusting her. Your case proved that criminals like her are professionals at exploiting grief. You saved my self-respect. A woman from Florida, she stole my husband's life insurance money and I blamed myself for being careless. Now I know it wasn't my fault, it was her crime. 23 letters. 23 families who'd been victimized by the same predator. 23 people who were getting their money back and their dignity restored because I'd refused to accept being erased from my own story. I sat in my kitchen reading those letters, holding Roland's chipped coffee mug, listening to the tick of my grandmother's clock. For the first time since his death, I felt truly at peace. The money was being returned, all $58 million, plus interest and penalties. The FBI had recovered assets from bank accounts in 7 countries. My warehouses, my shipping contracts, my logistics company. Everything Roland and I had built together was coming back to me. But that wasn't the victory that mattered most. The real victory was sitting in that same kitchen where Marjorie had coached me to lie to federal investigators. The same kitchen where she tried to gaslight me into forgetting my own reality. The same kitchen where I'd decided to fight back instead of accepting her version of who I was supposed to be. I wasn't the broke widow she'd painted me as in her wedding speech. I wasn't the burden who should be grateful for her charity. I wasn't the confused old woman who didn't understand her own finances. I was Selena Hartwell. I'd built a $60 million business empire alongside my husband. I'd caught a federal criminal who'd been operating across state lines for years. I'd helped bring justice to dozens of families who thought they'd never see their stolen money again. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my place in my own story. Marcus came by that afternoon with news of his own. I filed for divorce this morning. Even if she gets out of prison someday, I never want to see her again. How are you feeling about everything? Angry, embarrassed, but also proud of you. I'm proud that my mother is the kind of person who fights back when someone tries to destroy her. We sat together in comfortable silence, drinking coffee from Roland's old mugs. My son was healing from his betrayal, I was recovering from mine, and somewhere in federal prison, Marjorie was learning what powerless really meant. The final legal paperwork came in January. Marjorie had been sentenced to 27 years in federal prison. The judge had been particularly harsh because of the number of victims and the systematic nature of her crimes. She'd be eligible for parole in 15 years, when she was 43 years old. Leonard called to give me the news. It's over, Selena. Completely over. She'll never be able to hurt anyone else. What about the other victims? Everyone's getting their money back. The government recovered almost everything she stole over the past 5 years. It's the largest financial fraud recovery in the state's history. That night, I made dinner for myself using Roland's favorite recipe, chicken parmesan with garlic bread. I set the table with our good china, opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion, and toasted the empty chair where he used to sit. We did it, honey, I said to the quiet kitchen. We protected what we built together. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, the same clock that had ticked through our entire marriage, through the dark months of grief, through the investigation and the trial and the victory. I realized then that justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, in cream-colored envelopes and recovered bank accounts, and the satisfaction of knowing that truth eventually wins. I'd learned that grief makes you vulnerable, but it doesn't make you weak. That silence can be strategy. That patience and careful documentation are more powerful than anger and accusation. That sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. And I'd learned that your story belongs to you, not to the people who try to rewrite it for their own benefit. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery where Roland is buried. I brought fresh flowers and sat beside his headstone for an hour, telling him everything that had happened since his death. She thought she could erase me, I told him. She thought I was just a broke widow who should be grateful for her charity. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The winter sun was warm on my face as I walked back to my car. I had my life back, my money back, and most importantly, my dignity back. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for justice. I'd learned that sometimes you have to build it yourself, one document at a time, one phone call at a time, one quiet victory at a time. Paper remembers everything. Truth has its own timeline. And the sweetest justice is not in shouting your innocence, but in standing calmly while the evidence speaks for you. What would you do if someone tried to steal your entire life story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, your story belongs to you. Don't let anyone else write the ending. And if this story inspired you to stand up for yourself or helped you see that justice is possible even when everything seems lost, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We share stories of courage, justice, and people who refuse to be erased every week. Your support means everything, and I'd love to hear how this story impacted you in the comments. Together, we can inspire others to fight for their own truth and never let anyone rewrite their story. Until next time, remember, silence can be power, truth always surfaces, and sometimes the best revenge is simply being too strong to stay down.